We are here on the roof of the old fort. It's often, well, now it's called the Qasr al Hosn, but a Hosn is really more of just a fort, whereas what we see here is a palace. And in fact, when it was built, the bigger part, the more prominent part, the part that one sees from the outside, which was the White Fort in Abu Dhabi, that part was built sometime after 1939, when Sheikh Shahbood realized there would be some money coming in, extra money, so to speak, on top of taxes and so on. This was by far the most impressive building on the entire coast. This palace was then built for the family, for Sheikh Shahbood's brothers and their families, and they all had sort of sections of the living area. And of course it was the seat of government. It was probably no longer conceived as a refuge for the population if there was any invasion or any problem. So around the fort you would have to imagine it was sand, no roads. Between here and the beach was just only sand. Between the fort was only sand. There were some stony structures between here and the sea. There was first of all what they called the northern Beit Shamali, which was the guest house, the ruler's guest house. Also in the area, the region where the souk was, there were wind tower houses like in Dubai, but unfortunately all these houses and the souk were bulldozed in 1969. The entrance is directly here with this little cupola, and that is sort of also shows that it was a palace-like building, that it demonstrated that also we no longer need it as a fort where we, cuddle inside and are afraid of people. It is built with nice features and special attention also to artistic expression. In the northeast corner of the old arrangement of the fort is the oldest tower, which probably dates from 1761 when it was first noticed. Next to this tower and around this tower then the fort grew up with 4 other towers, so all in all there were five towers, but the old part was probably built with coral stone, and certainly the very old tower is coral stone. Another thing one has to point out, that these walls are very thick and they keep the cool inside, and of course in the winter they keep the warm. In all the sort of living quarters upstairs you have windows which are between shoulder high and the ground. Why? Because first of all you sit on the ground, so that's where you want the draft, and also further up when the sun is like this now, the higher you have your window, the more it falls into the room. Why do I know anything about this fort is that in 1969 I'd come to Abu Dhabi in 1967, not intending to stay here for very long, maybe 2 years or so, while my husband was finding oil in the desert. My field in study was social history, so in fact I wanted to know how the society actually was before all this change. I knew no Arabic when I came, so first learn some Arabic, find material about and ask people, and generally find out what does it mean if people are, or if society is structured in tribes, and how does this compare also to what one knows maybe about medieval tribes in Europe. I then came to the old fort in early 1969, and I found that there was indeed a center, a small center that had been built up with that Sheikh Zayed had wanted to be established to help to, first of all, find the material which verified what treaties the UAE, the Abu Dhabi and the other trucial states actually had with with the British, who were now abrogating these treaties. Mr. Ahmed Khalifa Suedi had an office here, and he was the Rais Diwan, and he also had initialed this Center for Documentation. He sort of supervised it on behalf of Sheikh Zayed on the sort of not daily but weekly basis. But later, when the center, many years later, moved into much grander premises in the old fort, and eventually by 98, the Center for Documentation inhabited the entire fort, all the old part, the new part, everything. In this space between the old fort and the sort of what I call the palace, in this space where these two villas built. And I think very few people were aware that, and you could only see it really when you came onto the roof, that on top of that particular villa there was a bear, a stuffed brown bear, which when I saw it once when I came up on the roof, I tried to find out what it was about this strange thing on the roof. And I was told that it was a gift from the Shah of Persia to Sheikh Shahbut. It disappeared when, in the 80s, when the fort was refurbished in a big way. And these two villas were done away with because they did not belong to the original story of the fort. Here we are downstairs in the old fort. I know that the rooms upstairs were Sheikh Shahbut and Sheikh Miriam's rooms, and this here is immediately below. And we can see that they are very specially decorated. We don't have nothing like that in the east wing. This is here the south wing. These panels and painted plaster, and they were made by artists, by Persian artists. So it was just, it was meant to sort of lighten up the room a little. When it was made, it would have been when the fort was built in the early 40s. This, what we are looking at now, has actually been taken down. So they took them down, took photographs and plaster casts and all the rest of it, and put it back during the restoration in the 80s. So what we look at here are actually not exactly the originals. An interesting thing was my husband told me, David, when one time he came in from the desert or from Tarif, and between the Magda Bridge and the old fort there was nothing. So he saw the fort, the white palace really on the horizon in the setting sun. It was getting dark. By the time he came closer, there was light. The whole fort was illuminated, and it was certainly the first time he had seen it. I mean, it was probably about 1964. Goodness, how wonderful and how surprising. And then it went all off again, and it put the whole town into darkness because it was just probably too much electricity. Of course, one is nostalgic coming here, and we were very sad to leave the fort, particularly since it had so much history of its own before we even come here, but then also 30 years of building up something which the country is only now starting to appreciate, and that is keeping records. Is not the first thing that you think when you build a new state and a new government, but as I said earlier, Sheikh Zayed had this foresight that we need written material that substantiates our history, even so our people remember. We really hope that it will become a museum where all these aspects can be demonstrated.